Welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to have you here today. Let me introduce myself. I'm Giorgio Rasetto. I'm the president and one of the founder of Poito. Poito is a students team here at Polytechnic of Turin. We do education and development into the Bitcoin industry, let's say. And we started this project 4 years ago. So I'm very proud to see all these people today here. We have been working hard, or orange peeling people. So to see all these people today here make me proud. So thank you. Yeah, Poito. Poito is a students team. As I said, we do education and development into the Bitcoin environment. So this is a call to action. If anyone wants to join us, please. We are here also after the Q&A session. So if you want, ask us if you want to participate in the students team. As I said, we do education. So we organize these type of conferences. We organize events and lectures and stuff like that. And we also organize, let's say, development course. So if you are a developer and you want to understand, have a better understanding on the, let's say, technicals of Bitcoin, you can ask us and we will provide you some educational contents. If you are a developer and you want to participate in the students team, we have a development department. So you can participate in the real projects. We have a kind of examples here. There's Gabriele that is working on Stratum V2. We are co-working with Vexel, that is an open source project to peer-to-peer exchange of Bitcoin, of course. Yeah, we have a lot of projects we are working on, so if you want to participate, please join us. Okay, today we have two great guests here. I guess you know them, but I will introduce these guys. Yeah, the first one is, of course, Saifedean. Saifedean Ammous is an international best-selling economist and author. It was an economics professor in Lebanon, and he holds, there's a lot of stuff to say, so he holds a PhD in sustainable development at the British Columbia University in New York. He holds a master in management at London School of Economics. He holds a bachelor degree in mechanical engineer. And yeah, he created a lot of books that you can buy after the Q&A session. So yeah, stay here to have a book signing session. And then there's Giacomo. He's a physicist, he's a consultant, and a worldwide famous educator, you know, and also a professional Twitter troll, you know. Yeah, sex symbol, of course. And also the director at the Plan B Network. You have probably a flyer on your table. Plan B Network is a wonderful project of education, international education. Maybe Giacomo will introduce you after what he's doing. Yeah, let's go on. Let's start with the agenda. Now I finished my introduction. Now Giacomo will start with a few questions for Saifedean. About his last book, Principal Economics, and about in general about Bitcoin, of course. Yeah, then there will be a Q&A from you. So I hope you have prepared your questions. If not, please do it now. And then there will be this Q&A. And after the Q&A, I would say in 1 hour, starting by now, there will be a book session. Book signing session. So if you already have your book, you can sign it from Saifedean. If you want to buy one, you can buy one here. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. I pass the word to Giacomo.
Thank you. Thank you, Giorgio. Very happy to be here and really amazed by the good organization and the level of participation. Truly impressive. We did have waves in Italy of interest for Bitcoin, waves starting from 2013. The first Italian Bitcoin conference was in a university, the Polytechnic of Milan. And it was well participated, but mostly by people coming from abroad. Very, very few Italians in that conference. And now we can fill a university room of well-selected Bitcoin-only people, which is a great success. Entering here, probably you have seen that there are also some shitcoin things around the university, but we are slowly taking over. And that's mostly due to the work of Poito group, impressive group. So impressive that now I had to be in exile from Milan and be here in Turin with you. This really is not a joke. Like what we are doing with Plan B Network, I will explain a little bit. But the main goal was to focus on the city of Lugano. We have an understanding with the three universities of Lugano, USI, SUPSI, and Franklin to do Bitcoin education. But then the Polytechnic of Turin, thanks to Poito guys, beat Lugano on timing and put Torino on the map of Bitcoin education. So much so that the first big university-related education initiative will happen here and not in Lugano. So, yeah. You guys are fast. And since Saifedean didn't know that, I had to scam him into I told Saifedean, you look, Torino is just 40 minutes from Milan. I didn't specify that it was just the train and the car is a little bit longer, so yeah, sorry, rug pull you. And, but now that you're here, you will come back and you cannot go away. Also because we have the car. So, Plan B Network. So, what is this initiative you can see here? The idea is to organize, coordinate, and integrate Bitcoin educational initiative all around the world. Everybody is doing some level of Bitcoin education inside the community. Some are doing that at a very good level like Bitpolito. Some are doing something smaller or cheaper or easier or faster. But the point is that many educators are reinventing the wheel. Everybody is redesigning a Bitcoin 101 course. Everybody is re-establishing relationship with the universities. So the idea is to create a ordered, some kind of well-ordered network of education initiative. We have some good sponsors that are helping us with some budget. So we're starting to do that. I will shield the first course, which is today, here in the Polytechnic, in another room, and with Saifedean as the first professor. I will give you a little bit more of details. But first of all, a few words on the dynamics of this morning. Giorgio already said it, most of it. So first of all, I will start with a few questions to Saifedean directly. Then we will couple like 3-4 questions, which means 2 hours. You know. Then we will pass the microphone over, and you can ask your question. Question must end with some kind of question mark. Is not, you are not explaining your project to Saifedean, you're not writing your book, you are just asking a question. So it must end with a question mark. It must be possible to answer with some kind of sentence. And after, I think that let's say midday, noon, we will wrap it up, and we will open up the book signing session. So you can see the books here. You can buy them in dirty fiat money. So for everybody, any kind of reference to automobile brands is completely casual here. Fiat money in the sense of fiat. And so you can buy it in Bitcoin or in fiat money, and Saifedean will sign it for you. At the same time, though, I will sit in the other corner of the room, and I will accept payments for the course of this afternoon. What's happening at this in this afternoon? We are going all to lunch. We are coming back at 4 p.m., not right here, but what is the name of the place? Covivio Workspace, so pretty close. 4 p.m., and we will have a 2-3 hour lecture by Saifedean on principles of economics. The difference is that this lecture will not be open to everybody, will be a closed one, and it will be paid. A very cool thing is that the lecture will be streamed live in a room of the University Don Bosco San Salvador, where students from University Don Bosco will be gathering to 40 of them, will be gathering to watch the lecture and also ask some questions to Saifedean. So that's something that is smaller. It's paid. If you in theory, the preparation was you go on planb.network events and you buy with Lightning 90 euros. But the payment processor crashed this morning, so we have an alternative. You come to me at the end of this, and you pay me directly, or somebody helping me. You can do it in Bitcoin, and in that case, you can just pay the equivalent of $90 in Bitcoin via Lightning. If you don't want to pay in Bitcoin, you can use dirty fiat, but since fiat money has a problem of divisibility, I will require 100 for each because I don't want to deal with 10 here, 10 there. So 100. So there is that's fine. It's a penalty because you're using fiat money. That's completely consistent with the mission. Thank you.
Yes.
Last salesman pitch that I have to do. There will be the rest of the course will start in April and it will go on until June. It will culminate in the Lugano Summer School in July. And there will be 16 lectures by me and other people of Plan B Network, and other guest star lectures like Saifedean's, including names like Jack Dorsey, Katie Wood. So if you want to pay each guest star lecture individually, just wait for it. If you want to pay all the course, ask to me. I can sell you all the course, and maybe I can put inside also a Shimano bike, or we'll see. We will discuss. So yeah, last thing, and then we start. Pictures. Some of you may be very privacy aware. We respect that. It's useless because there are cameras everywhere. So anyway, but if you really want, we wanted to take a picture with the audience because it's very large and very nice. If you have problems with your face being on a picture, raise your hand now so that we can arrange. That's also very tricky. So don't take those. That's also tricky because in order to tell that, you have to expose yourself now under the spotlight. So it's paradoxical.
He has something to hide.
Exactly. Now it's like anonymity set of 2, basically. Everybody's. If you are the only one asking for privacy, you don't have a lot of privacy. But so please take the picture in that direction. Okay. Thank you. And now we start with the question. So the first question for Saifedean will be: so we are in a university. And I always like to make people at ease and not to create awkward situation. So the first thing that I will ask to you is the criticism against universities. In particular, your background is academic.
Yes.
You were a professor, before you were a scholar, a professor, a researcher, and now you work.
You should post on Twitter.
You should post on Twitter like me. And basically, you went private. You went outside. It's like the beginning of the movie Ghostbusters, when they leave a university and they go in the real sector, private sector. So the question would be, do you think that fiat money, the same way it corrupted government, food, and whatever, did irreversibly corrupt the university academic world, and so that's why you don't work anymore within the system? Or in order to please our host here, you think there may be some exception, some place we can take over or take back?
I mean, other than this university, obviously, I think the problem is different. Well, first of all, let me just start by saying thank you so much, Giacomo. Thank you to everybody for organizing and inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here. And apologies to everybody from the city of Torino, because we're always talking bad things about Fiat, and I know you guys use that name for other contexts, and your car industry is probably going to be ruined by Bitcoiners saying Fiat is bad, bad, bad. So maybe they should rebrand and call it Bitcoin or something. It could be a lot better. But for now, we can't cease fire because we have to fight the Fiat enemy. So now, on the question of universities, to be honest, my personal experience and my studying of how universities have evolved over time suggests there are a lot of problems with the way that it's done today. And as you said, it's mainly fiat money. And if you look at my work and you think this is just a guy who's blaming everything on fiat, you would not be inaccurate, but that doesn't mean I'm wrong. Just because I have the same answer for everything doesn't mean that that answer is wrong. It could also be correct. So yeah, in my work, everything has been ruined by fiat and everything gets fixed by Bitcoin. And I think universities are a good example of that. Primarily, the main way in which they've been ruined is the fact that governments print the money that goes to finance universities. And so universities have now, you know, it's always, I think once you understand this idea, in English there's a saying, he who pays the piper calls the tune. Whoever is the person paying the bills is the person who gets to dictate the policy, whether it's a university or whether it's any kind of organization. And so when governments are paying for universities, it's not students who are paying, it's the government. So the customer is the government, and the student, if they're not paying, I think everybody has learned this lesson today from Facebook. If you're not the one paying, then you are not the consumer, you are the product. That's why all of these institutions that run for free end up being subverted, because you know, you think they run for free, but in reality somebody's paying and that person is dictating the agenda. So with universities, it's most pronounced, I would say, in economics. Probably the biggest, most corrupt field in universities is economics, because corruption is the one that led to the corruption of everything else. It started in the US as early as the 1920s, when the university started focusing on, when economics moved as a question of people who are just trying to study markets philosophically and trying to understand how markets work. In the 1920s, because of fiat money, because of government funding of the universities, the entire raison d'etre of the field of economics changed from studying the world as it is and trying to understand the world as it is, into how do we make the world better? How does the government, with its monetary policy and its fiscal policy, achieve the goals that we want? How can we get rid of unemployment? How can we increase GDP? How can we increase industrial production? How can we become a developed country? All of these different things, they're all central planning questions. They're all asked from the perspective of a government agency that is going to dictate what you should do. And they're all financed by central banks that print money. And so I think at this point, I spent 10 years after finishing my PhD working at a university, and at no point did I think there was much hope in reforming this system from within, because when you try and argue intellectually, in most cases, and particularly in economics from my experience, when you try and argue intellectually about things like, why is this the case, why is this not the case, people aren't even interested in theoretical arguments or data-driven arguments about anything. They are in an industry, and there's no room for sitting and thinking intellectually, because you're in an industry and it's a highly competitive industry and you need to churn out papers. And the way to get papers out is to just not rock the boat. Find out what the journals want to read and send that to the editors. So it's almost like if you're in a football game and you're trying to argue with people about the rules of the game. During the football game, the players are focused on scoring the goals according to the rules as they exist. So academia, in my mind, is becoming a little bit like that, where people don't have the time to even think about it, because it's becoming extremely industrial, and because ultimately the real problem, as I mentioned earlier, is that the payment is not coming from the students. So the student are the product and the consumer is the government, and what the government buys is essentially propaganda and brainwashing. So the product is producing people who believe in Keynesian economics, producing people who listen to the central bank as if this is an actual organization that's out there to help us, not a bunch of criminals who are stealing money from us. And this is an enormously valuable product. If you have a money printer, you run the printer, and it's worth running the printer a little bit to finance propaganda around it. And I also think it's not just fiat. I think universities also have a problem with the technological revolution that is making information so much more easily available everywhere. That I think the institution of the university made a lot more sense before the internet, because before the internet, if you wanted to learn anything, whether it's economics or engineering or medicine, you needed books, and it wasn't easy to just find these books everywhere. You had to go to a university where they had a big library, and they had all the people who understood those books very well. And you went and you spent a few years reading the books, supervised by those people, and then you figured out and learned the thing that you needed to learn. This makes a lot more sense 50 years ago or 100 years ago than it does now, because now all of the books that you want, all of the information that you want, all of the professors that you want, they're all online. You can find all the information online, and you can do it a lot more efficiently if you do it online, because you can do it according to your time. You can keep doing your job. You can have a job on the side. You can learn at your own pace. And I think this is just going to become more and more of a competitive advantage that the internet, that education on the internet offers, because of the flexibility and because of the problems that universities have in being responsive as market institutions, because they are being financed by governments. They have a lot less of an incentive to be nimble and to respond to students and to respond to students' demands. So as a result, we see that education is becoming more and more about credentials rather than about education. So most people go to university not because they need to learn something, because if you want to learn it, you can just go online and learn it on your own, or for free, or for very little money. But you can't get your credentials online for free. And that's what universities are becoming for. And this is really the best reason to go to university today, if you need credentials. So obviously, this university is accepted. Our hosts are immune to everything that I said, but that's my general opinion.
Thank you.
Thanks.
One, two, three. Second question is about topics impacted by Bitcoin and criticism on fiat money. Many of you probably have read already, I hope so, and if you haven't, buy it and get it signed and read it. The first book from Saifedean, which is the Bitcoin Standard. I used to joke that this book is actually not really about Bitcoin, and Saifedean eventually agreed. This book is mostly about fiat money, about the invention and the corruption of fiat money, and Bitcoin is just a little part at the end. It's just like a little bit of final surprise, but this is about fiat money. And then the second book was in a way the other way around. So it's officially about fiat money, but it explains fiat money from the perspective of the Bitcoin protocol. But then now you went completely into the basics and the principles of economics with the principle of economics, which is what we will discuss at length during this afternoon and a little bit here. But then there is also this fiat food. Fiat food. I don't think many of you have it yet. It's another author, but published by you. And the picture are basically a rare steak, Richard Nixon, and some chips. So some people, even inside the Bitcoin community, are very triggered every time from Bitcoin we branch off into any other topic. And there is actually, even in the Fiat Standard, there is an entire chapter about Fiat life, which touches a lot of stuff, art, food, entertainment. So my question would be, especially for the people that may feel a little bit disoriented by this, is there really such a strong connection between money and unrelated things like food, art, or you are just a very fixated person that wants to see Bitcoin everywhere? Like?
Yeah, no, I just want people to eat like I tell them to eat. That's the real motivation here. No, I think, ultimately, Bitcoin or fiat are money. And money is something that takes part in pretty much all economic transactions. 1/2 of every economic transaction is carried out with money. And perhaps even more important than the transactions that you do with money are the transactions that you do with yourself. In other words, all of your monetary decisions and financial decisions are strongly related to the kind of money that you're using. If you find yourself in a situation where you live in a place where you expect your money to appreciate every year 2%, you're going to be behaving very differently from if you lived in a place where your money depreciates by 90% in a year. So if you expect the money that you have to maintain its value or gain 2%, you're going to deal with it very differently than if you expect it to lose 90%, right? Now, how will you deal with it differently? Well, there are obvious ways. The economic aspects are the most obvious. So if you're living in a country with high inflation, you're likely going to try and spend your money as fast as you can. And you see this in countries that have hyperinflation. People run to the supermarket the day they get their paycheck, because if you wait until the last week of the month to buy your groceries for the last week of the month, they will have become more expensive. So people want to spend. Now, what happens if you turn down the speed of the hyperinflation a little bit, where instead of losing, say, 50% per month, you are losing 5% per month, 3% per month? It's not quite as drastic. You don't see everybody run to the supermarket at the same day and fight over the goods in the supermarket, but you do see the same relationship, the same phenomena, which is prioritizing spending today and discounting saving and not thinking too much about saving. In other words, what we see is the lack of the ability to provide for the future. Because the money can't hold on to its value for the future, you have a less reliable mechanism for transferring economic wealth to your future self. And so think of it as like a communication channel or transportation channel, where money is this vessel where you put value so that you can get it in the future. So I'm working today, and I'm going to take the value that I earned today and I'm going to put it in a box so that in a year I can take it and I can spend it. Now, how much you save and how much you think about the future is very strongly linked to how good that vessel is at transferring that money. If it's going to eat up 90% of the money in a year, you're not going to save a lot. And then that's going to reflect on all kinds of behaviors, where you're going to become more and more short-termist and more present-focused, present-oriented, or as we call it in economics, high time preference. You discount the future very heavily, and you prioritize the present. So we can see this in economic decisions, but it also obviously reflects everywhere else. And it reflects on decisions that people take about their own health. When you have a reliable way of providing for the future, you think a lot about the future, and so you're more likely to take decisions and carry out actions that reward you in the future. And the opposite is true. If you find yourself in a way where you have no mechanism for providing for your future self, you have no idea what you're going to be doing in 5 years. How are you going to be eating in 5 years when you don't even know how to provide, how to take the wealth that you have today for yourself in 5 years' time? Well, you're naturally going to be discounting life in 5 years from now compared to today. And so you're going to be carrying out decisions that are more focused on the present, rewarding yourself in the present rather than rewarding yourself in the future. And so that leads to all kinds of short-termist decisions, which then reflect in long-term consequences that are negative. So you spend all of your money, you don't have money in the future, you become poor, or you eat food that is bad for you today because you don't care about the long-term impact of it. So this is one aspect of it, I think, that is very true and very powerful. It's the fact that the money itself, the hardness of the money, controls the way in which we deal with time preference and the way we think about the future. But then I think there's the other aspect of it, the flip side of the coin. So when I lose the ability to save for the future, when I lose the ability to take the money that I have today and teleport it into the future, why am I losing it? It's not just some random accident and didn't get lost in a boating accident. Someone is out there sucking away the economic value that I'm trying to save for the future. Who could that someone be, I wonder? It's your local central bank and the global central bank that essentially are the world's biggest parasites out there robbing everybody of their wealth by increasing the supply of money. So where is all that wealth going? Well, that's the other side of the coin. They're taking that wealth that you can't save anymore, and they're using it to shape the world as they see fit. And so what have they been using that money for? So and this is again another problem with academia, if you look at, for instance, academic economics, they study with the most meticulous and most elaborate and most sophisticated methodologies. They study all of these incredibly arcane questions. You know, what happens in a tiny little village if we take the population and we give them a little bit extra from this kind of food, or if we give them this medical intervention, or if we change the schools to be, say, mixed schools, to separating the boys from the girls. And they'll do these extremely expensive studies to analyze this over years and spend a lot of money to try and answer these questions. But they spend very little money talking about, or time, talking about the impacts of inflation. There's a very good reason for that. They are the ones who benefit from inflation. They get paid from it. They get paid from the people who benefit from inflation. So there's very little focus on saying bad things about inflation, which, you know, if you're a capitalist, you understand that anytime there's something missing, you can complain about it, or you can realize that that just means that there's a huge opportunity. And that's basically why I wrote my first and second book, because there is a huge ocean out there of problems being created by inflation, which all these academics are ignoring, because you don't get promoted as an academic, you don't get funded if you say bad things about your local central bank. You know, you're allowed to criticize it, as in say maybe they shouldn't have raised the rates this month, they should have raised it last month, or they should raise it next month. But if you wanted to say, well, they shouldn't be raising rates, those people should go drive a car or deliver pizza or do something productive with their life instead of managing everybody's money, then you're not going to have much of a career. So there's a huge opportunity of just looking at, well, what happens when government is able to influence this part of the world or this field of life with all of the wealth that they steal from others? What is their incentive? How are their incentives shaped in this field? What would their incentive dictate that they do? And what is the impact of what they do? And if you just start looking at this, you see it everywhere. If you just apply this framework, people have a shorter time horizon for their actions. People think about the present and can't think about the future, on the one hand. And then on the other hand, you have a government with effectively infinite wealth able to affect those things. So my favorite example is the one on which we wrote this book, Fiat food. Well, think about it. On the one hand, people's ability to save for the future is declined. So people have less and less care for the future. And so people are just naturally likely to not care too much about what the long-term impacts of their food are, because people are just living for the moment, right? You just eat whatever feels good. And who cares about what's going to happen in 5 years or 10 years from now? People spend all of their money. People rarely save. And if you need major expenditures, you just pay, you just borrow, and everybody gets into debt. So then the equivalent of that behavior nutritionally would be eat whatever feels good today. Eat candy, eat junk, and you know, hopefully by the time it starts giving me health problems, science will have found the magic pill that will allow me to fix this. And that's high time preference behavior. Now, on the other hand, what happens when the government is able to take all of that money, all of that wealth from us? Why would they want to mess with the food industry, and what would their incentive for messing with food be? Well, if they're printing all that money, if they're increasing the supply of money, what's happening to food prices? Food prices are rising. Human beings don't like to pay more for things. Human beings get angry when they have to pay more. And so all over the world, governments have a major, major nightmare, which is we don't want the price of food to go up. Of course, there is an easy way to stop the price of food going up. Stop robbing people of their wealth by destroying their money. But of course, nobody has time for these kind of effective solutions. People much prefer the solutions that involve theft. You know, you want to be able to incorporate theft into your model of how you fix the world. So how can you stop the prices of food from rising while maintaining your ability to rob everybody and destroy their livelihood and take away their wealth from their money? Well, the answer is you tell people to stop eating good food and you tell them to eat garbage instead of it. And then if they eat garbage, the garbage is cheaper. And then if you just need to convince them that garbage is better for them than food, then there is no inflation problem. And in fact, this is a very, very powerful way of understanding all of nutrition science, which is another massively corrupt field in academia today. If you go to a university, talk to an average nutritionist, the nutritionist will tell you that pretty much the same thing everywhere in the world, that you need to eat 6 to 10 ratios of grain in a day, which is a lot of grain. It's basically a recipe for diabetes. That you need to eat, you should avoid animal fats, you should eat the cheap, heavily processed oils that are everywhere in the supermarkets, everywhere in the world. And you'll notice there's a clear trend here. The best foods for human health are the things that are not cheap. They require proof of work. If you want beef, you have to have a cow that's going to walk around for a year and a half, eating grass, walking around in the sun. And there's no way to make that process industrialize. It needs to grow and eat and sleep for a year and a half until it's big enough that you can harvest it. So there's no button to click so that you can make the cow grow in a week instead of a year and a half. And so there's limits on how much you can optimize that process. And so these kinds of foods, the ones that are very healthy because they are, well, they're not healthy because they're expensive, but they're healthy, they're expensive generally. These become unaffordable when inflation is raising the prices of everything. And so we see there's a very concerted effort to tell people to stay away from beef, to stay away from meat, to stay away from animal fats, and instead eat heavily processed food. Eat grains, which historically has always been the food of slaves and the food of peasants. And yet today it's being marketed as the smart, intelligent thing to do. If you want to save the planet, apparently that's how you fix the world, because the whole entire planet's weather is linked to a thermostat controlled by what you have for lunch, right? That's what science says. If you eat beef, you're going to ruin the weather of the planet. If you eat soy, you're going to make the planet nicer. So it's up to you. This kind of nonsensical pseudoscience is getting funded by the fiat money. So it's no coincidence. Climate science, nutrition science, all forms of science all agree that eating the things that become expensive with inflation is bad for you, for the planet, for everyone. And if you do it, you're a selfish, horrible person, and you need to be re-educated. On the other hand, eating cheap, highly industrialized crap that is very profitable for the corporations that can make it in very large quantities, things that are shelf stable, so they can produce them and ship them all over the world and spend years in storage and still manage to sell them because they're shelf stable. These things, they're highly good for the planet, and if you eat them, you're a good person. And I think it's, I mean, you could say I'm just being crazy and this is my own bias, but it's remarkable how many people get to see this. Even before I wrote my book, even before I wrote the Fiat Standard, which discusses this, even before that, a lot of people would joke about it, and it's a joke, but I think it's a lot more than a joke. It's very true that once people get into Bitcoin, you see those two processes that I mentioned getting reversed, and you see people going to fix their diet. On the one hand, you see it, you hear this story often. It's not just with diet, also with drugs and with alcohol. People will say, well, I used to drink a lot, but then I figured out that stacking sats is so much better than alcohol, and now instead of drinking, I buy Satoshis, and it's a much healthier drug addiction, and it's a rewarding drug addiction. It's a very common experience. It's very common to see people who get into Bitcoin and then start thinking about marriage and start a family and start having kids. These are very common, and it's not just a coincidence in my mind. It's something that I felt myself, and I see in many, many people who repeat the same thing. Once you have Bitcoin, because you now are able to save, because you're able to think of the future, suddenly all of your decisions become much more future-oriented. And so there's less temptation to get drunk, there's less temptation to spend money on drugs, less temptation to do stupid things that reward you today at the expense of the future, and more of an incentive to eat well, to start a family, to take care of your health, and so on. So we see this repeating. And of course, the other aspect of it is that once people get into Bitcoin and they stop suffering from inflation, because Bitcoin really is the only way to fix the problem of inflation, you start being able to afford to eat the things that they tell you are bad for you, because they're not bad for you, they're just expensive. And Bitcoin fixes this. And I think this is not a coincidence, and I think it's going to amplify, that we're going to continue to see that as more and more people drop fiat and move toward Bitcoin, we're going to see these kind of behavioral changes in eating better, becoming more family-oriented, becoming more long-term. And I think it's a very deep rabbit hole, and I invite you to read my books and go explore what else fiat has ruined and Bitcoin fixes.
Great. That's the trap of Bitcoin. Finally, you have censorship-resistant money that you can use to buy drugs online, but you quit because now you think about the future. That's a trap. Also, before getting into the next question, let's appreciate for a second even from his anti-grain position, Saifedean gave a lot of credit to Italian culinary tradition because he sent the central bankers to deliver pizza. So that was a huge tribute. You should appreciate it. So last question, oh, maybe another one later. So this book, Principles of Economics, you have 18 chapters, right? 18 chapters about 18 different things, and you are giving a course during your year of content. So, by the way, you go on Saifedean Ammous.com, is correct?
Saifedean.com.
Saifedean, just a name. Saifedean.com, and you can buy a subscription that will also buy you a course during 1 year online that we will go over all the chapters of this book. So this course, to be made properly, takes basically 18 lectures. I invite you to subscribe, even if you come today, but the complete course will make a lot of sense. So 18 lectures to give you an idea of the book. I asked Saifedean the titanic effort to condensate some of it into 2-3 hours this afternoon, and now I will do something even more evil. Let's condensate even more in 2 minutes what this book is about.
Buy Bitcoin. That's basically it.
That was easy.
You don't need to know much more.
I will accept this question, just doing my last one. Just one specific question on the last chapter. The last one is on governments, right?
Yes.
And this is where civilization. So the last part 5, is about violence, defense, civilization. So it's basically about anarcho-capitalism.
Yeah.
So if you are into Bitcoin but you are not entirely crazy yet, I absolutely suggest you to go through the last chapter.
Yes, if your family still doesn't find you weird, read
Yeah,
this
exactly.
book. Then you'll fix
If
it.
you can still have a discussion at Christmas table, you should definitely finish this book. But even if we are discussing the end of nation states, basically, or the privatization or re-privatization of most of the government function, you are, and I'm doing something myself in that regard, you are now an advisor to a nation state, the state of El Salvador.
Yes.
So what's happening there? Are we all getting statist or what? Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, I think there is there is some truth to that. It is a little bit of a criticism for an anarcho-capitalist. I will say, though, I think in this book, so I get into this question. So I call myself an anarcho-capitalist, and I think government is a problem, not a solution, and it's a problem that presents itself as a solution. And I think human society without a state, without the legitimacy of coercion, would be a lot better. It wouldn't be utopia, wouldn't be ideal, but in my mind, there is it's a mind virus. The idea that we are taught to accept that one group of people, one person, or one entity is legitimate if they initiate aggression. And this is really the mind virus that is the problem. If you accept that it's wrong for me to take other people's stuff, but it's okay for him because for whatever reason God chose him, or his father chose him, or a popularity contest chose him, that means it's okay for him to initiate aggression and violence. Then you've just gotten scammed into slavery, effectively. That's what it is, because you've accepted that somebody has a claim for their property and for their needs and for their wants that supersedes your claims, needs, wants, and property. That they can take your things just because they decided that they should take your things. So in this book, I try and approach this question. I mean, I draw a lot on the work of Hoppe and Rothbard and a lot of other anarcho-capitalists. And I try and approach this question from an economic perspective. Like, how do you arrive at this? And why is it that a lot of Austrian economists are libertarians? And it begins with explaining violence. So the first 15 chapters, it's all about economizing. And it's all about economizing that's done consensually. Two people trade, or one person produces things with capital goods. Everything up until chapter 15 is all by agreement of everyone involved. Nobody's getting hurt, nobody's violating anybody else's rights. Then in chapter 16, of course, and during those chapters I say that obviously this isn't the only way that people can interact. People can interact violently and they can coerce each other. And that's what we will discuss in chapter 16, and that's what we do. In chapter 16, We discuss what happens when people interact with one another in a way that is violent. And once, throughout the 15 chapters, we're developing the economic way of thinking. We think through how humans act, and we think of the implications of economic activity. And then in chapter 16, when we get into violence, we think about, okay, well, violence is like an economic good, but it's the opposite of an economic good. It's an economic bad. So in other words, the economic good is protection from violence. So then, why is this economic good treated like it is different? And why can't it be just any other good? So why is protection from violence so different from apples and oranges and bananas and all these other goods that you can buy in the market? Most people understand why you want to have a free market in apples. Because if you didn't have a free market in apples, we've seen the example of Soviet economies, for instance, you end up with either massive shortages or massive surpluses, and then you end up with the destruction of a lot of capital. So why would this not be the case for defense against violence? I make the case that, in fact, it is the case. If you look around the world today, we have more private security police forces than there are police forces. The majority of people who have actual real wealth, or businesses that have wealth, banks, jewelry stores, rich people, they're not relying on the police for their protection. Pretty much everywhere in the world now, they rely on their private security. And if you think about it, that's actually fair. Why should everybody in Torino pay taxes to secure the richest guy's house and the richest people's jewelry store? Why shouldn't they pay for the security of it? And in fact, you see that, again, remember the issue that we mentioned earlier in terms of whoever pays is the one who is the real customer. And then if you apply that to defense, you see it's the same thing. You think that you are the one who's being protected by the police, but in reality, the police gets paid by the government, by the state, and it protects the state. And I urge you, as an experiment, go commit a crime against people, and then commit a crime against a member of the state, and see how differently the state reacts to those two crimes, right? They care a lot more. Think about somebody like Edward Snowden or Julian Assange. He just sent an email. It's information, right? If he did that with private people's information, like all of these companies did, like, say, Facebook or all of that, anybody care? No. Do it with government information, a lot of people care, and you end up ruining your life, basically. Because this is not, these defense institutions are paid by the government, and they're out there to protect the government. So this, in my mind, brings us to the idea of, well, how does a free society protect itself against violence? And the answer is private security. Private police is one example of it, but also private security has all kinds of other forms. People buy their own guns, people buy their own alarm systems, and this is an enormous industry. And it is an industry that can only function, like any industry, with market signals. It can only function in a market system, where there is a market, there's production, and there's prices, and capital is allocated based on economic calculation with economic prices and with a free market in the resources. So then we can see then that the government, in its modern form, in my opinion, is really not helping in that regard. In fact, it is just another form of violence, and we need to be protected against it rather than that. But does that mean that all forms of state and government are going to be necessarily eliminated in a free society? I think, while I would prefer that, I think realistically, there is scope for understanding a state, how government and state could exist even in a free society. And to do that, we go back to the work of Mises, and he focuses on the principle of self-determination. And if you keep that in mind, then you can see how you can witness government survive even in a free society, as long as people can opt in and out of government entities. And this is really the key point. And in the case of Mises, he mentions it abstractly mostly, but the work was really been developed most detail by Prince Hans Adam of Liechtenstein, who's written a book about 20 years ago called The State in the Third Millennium. And he offers this idea of everybody in the world today thinks, how do we improve government? What do we need is more democracy, more participation, more feedback, more all of these nice words that we hear. In other words, what you need is more involvement by the people who are governed in the process of government. And this has been effectively the ideal of democratic liberation over the past few centuries. It's not fair that the king just gets to do whatever he wants. The people have to have a say. So let's elect the Senate, let's elect the Congress, and let's spend all of our life fighting over what the government is going to do, because that's going to be better, supposedly. Well, he offers an alternative idea. Instead of having the government dissolve its power over more and more people, and having government decisions being dictated by more and more centralized authorities, decentralized authorities, he says, no, maybe what we should do is follow more of the corporate model. In other words, why do we have good Apple phones and laptops? It's not because Apple is a democracy. As an Apple buyer, you don't get to vote for what kind of things, what kind of features are going to be in the iPhone. You don't get to vote for who's going to be the engineer. You don't get to offer an opinion. You only have one choice. What is it? You buy or you don't buy. That's it. And that choice on its own is enough to get Apple to produce the world's best phone, because the CEO is out there, he's trying to get the most sales. And so the CEO doesn't have to deal with all of this democracy stuff. He just needs to deliver the results. And he has full executive authority over the company of Apple. He can decide, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're not going to make an iPhone, we're going to make more laptops. He has full authority. It's not a democracy. Apple iPhone users don't get to choose what's going to be featured on the next iPhone. They just get to choose if they buy it or not. Wouldn't that be a better model for structuring things? In fact, if you look at pretty much anything that works in your life, it works because it works on that model. There's one person in charge who has full executive authority, and the people who are buying the thing have the choice whether to buy it or not. So maybe Apple is going to make a catastrophic mistake in their design of their iPhones next year. Maybe. But then you have the choice. You go, you buy Samsung, you buy one of the many other dozens of phone makers. And if they mess up, the other one picks up the slack. And so then you're constantly in this process of improvement. So I believe that as the world becomes freer, and I believe that if Bitcoin takes away the money printer from governments, we're going to necessarily move more and more toward a world like that. Because without the ability to print money, governments have a much harder time enforcing their will on citizens. And therefore, governments will have to behave in a way that gets people to want to give them resources because people see value in it. And people are going to be able to step out or to exit from certain government arrangements. And you're going to see more secession movements, more people wanting to take to get independence from larger governments. And I think this would make sense in a sense of government as a service provider, and then even down to the level of the small village, each village can choose to opt out of being part of a country and join another country or become independent. And so, whereas, the last 50 years, for instance, in Europe, everybody thinks that the future of Europe is united Europe under one European Union, one government, one European Parliament, one bureaucracy, one European central bank. I think that a freer Europe would head toward a system of 1,000 Liechtensteins. Instead of having one European Union, you have hundreds of tiny little principalities and tiny little cities, and these places, because they're small, obviously none of them are going to be able to become self-sufficient, so they're all going to have to trade freely with one another. But for issues of governance, who's going to pick up the trash and so on, they are going to fall under these organizations which they can be part of or which they can opt out of. So you can opt out of the country in which you are, become independent, or join the other country. And if this exists, then it's no different, or it's not quite as good as a form of competition as with iPhones, but it's close. So the same way that the government, that iPhone producers have to make sure that they give you something good, government producers would have to not do terrible things. And I think we'd see that head toward that direction. So, and I think all of this to justify my hypocrisy on El Salvador. So I guess, yes, we need to get Bukele to become a king. And I think, to offer the people of El Salvador, and maybe neighboring countries as well, if you vote in a referendum and then you become part of the country or you leave the country. I think we're going to see that become more and more common over time. But, and in the case of El Salvador, I think, for me, that's not really I'm kind of joking. I'm not trying to make them a monarchy, at least not yet. But, but ultimately, what really matters for me, the reason that I find this really compelling and I'm interested in trying to help out as any way I can, is if governments start moving away from stacking government bonds, other government bonds, and buying treasuries, and instead holding Bitcoin, I think that is going to be hugely important for the world. Because right now, you could look at the world and you could say, well, this is an extremely messed up system. So every government in the world predominantly holds US government bonds in their reserves in US dollars. And this is constantly being devalued in order to finance US government spending. So everybody in the world is effectively being robbed in order to finance the US government being able to murder foreigners and bail out banks and carry out all kinds of horrific things and enrich their cronies and buy elections. We're all being robbed in order to finance the criminals in charge of the US government. All of it because we use the dollar, or we use currencies backed by the dollars, or we use currencies produced by central banks who hold US government bonds, or we pay taxes to a government that holds US government bonds. And so the government is being robbed, and it has to rob you to make up for it. And the only way out of that for me is Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is the only hard reserve asset that you can hold that is not built to depreciate, that's not built to rob you. And so I should add this, the fact that you're holding bonds and dollars that are depreciating means that you need to get in debt. That's why everybody is in debt, as I explained in the Fiat standard. The money loses value, so therefore, El Salvador or Italy or every government, every municipality, everybody in the world has to get in debt, because if you don't get into debt, you are holding on to the dollars in the treasuries and they're depreciating, and so the inflation is hurting you badly. At least if you're borrowing, then your liabilities are declining in value, so the inflation works slightly in your favor. So you're better off borrowing, and that's why everybody borrows. And that's how everybody becomes a debt slave for the United States government, because you have to do what the US government does, because if you don't, then you're going to find that your bonds are no longer floating on the markets. You're going to go bankrupt, and then your government's going to be removed. So this entire system of debt slavery relies on fiat inflation. And the only way out is to hold Bitcoin. And this is what's really amazing about what El Salvador is doing. And I know a lot of people want to focus on the idea of, well, not enough people are buying their pupusas and their coffees in El Salvador with Bitcoin. And to be perfectly honest, I really don't care. It doesn't matter to me. The pupusa problem in El Salvador is solved. People can buy it with dollars, they can buy it with their local coins, they can buy it with Bitcoin, they can buy it with credit cards, they can buy it with PayPal, with Venmo. I don't care. It's not a payment technology issue. What matters is the government being able to hold on to more and more Bitcoin puts it in a fiscal position where it might one day no longer need to borrow from global capital markets, no longer need to borrow from the IMF, and then it can just truly become an independent country. And so, just yesterday, Bukele posted the Bitcoin address where they hold their Bitcoins, and it's got about $400 million. And that's not all of their Bitcoin. So it's around almost $400 million right now. So assume they have 0.6 maybe billion dollars, and they're buying more, and the price of Bitcoin is going up. Eventually, you keep at this, the dollar keeps going down, Bitcoin keeps going up, they keep stacking more Satoshis. Eventually, they get to a point where the majority of their cash balances are held in Bitcoin. Their cash balance appreciates, they no longer need to borrow. So for me, I think if we can make this, we can see El Salvador present this as a successful model for breaking out of the IMF and the dollar system, I think a lot more countries are going to be interested in doing it, and I think that's a huge win for global freedom. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, when I said that my 3 questions will take a couple of hours, you were all laughing, but they did, basically. So now, very quick, we try to open up to the public. That was the point, but we are tentative. So we can only count on the fact that your questions will not be as good as mine, so maybe we'll cut that. So, questions? One there. Mike? Well, you can use this.
There's another one there.
Thank you. I am from Chile. I live in Croatia, but I'm from Chile. I would like to hear your words about Argentina case.
Yeah, I mean it's a little too early to tell right now. I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic, but mainly they are about the things that he's said and the rhetoric that he has. The idea that there's a politician out there quoting Rothbard is a huge, mind-blowing development. So that's nice. It's nice that these ideas are getting attention, particularly in the Spanish world. I think people who speak Spanish now are much more familiar with Mises and Rothbard than other countries. So that's encouraging. Now, in terms of actual changes, I mean, there are reasons to be skeptical, and I don't want to be too happy and getting too carried away. You know, libertarians, we always make fun of the leftists because they say, well, that wasn't real communism. Well, I'm getting my excuses in early in case things don't work out. I'm going to say this wasn't real libertarianism. So, in that vein, here's where I'm kind of not very optimistic about what he's doing. Fundamentally, ultimately, if you really want to change things in a place like Argentina, the way that I see it is you need to never allow anybody who works for the World Bank or the IMF to get into the country. This is it. Everything else is details. So obviously, you know, it would be great if, it's great, he's spoken about shutting down the central bank, hasn't done it yet, but that would be fantastic. Shutting down 99% of the Argentinian state's bureaucracy would also be fantastic. But it's unlikely that he's going to be able to pull off such drastic reforms domestically because he's allied with the center-right party that is part of the same Peronist deep state, effectively. So it's not extremely likely that he'll be able to pull off these reforms. He doesn't have a parliamentary majority, so he needs that. And then, on the other hand, the issue is he had, I think, in my mind, he had a golden opportunity in December last year when he took over and he said, we're going to shut down the central bank. The currency collapsed. There was something like an 80% collapse in the value of the currency just in a couple of months, which was, in my mind, the golden opportunity. Like, everybody who's holding pesos has pretty much gotten wiped out. And if you're holding pesos at this point in Argentina, I think you have bigger problems than money, most likely. You've got serious problems with your cognitive capacities. If you still think, you know, I'm going to buy this peso produced by the Argentinian government and expect it to work properly in 5 years' time, I think very few people left in Argentina are storing actual serious money that they care about in pesos. Everybody's got their money in dollars. So everybody's already, most of the money is already in dollars. And him taking over the government was likely to cause this massive devaluation of 70–80%. Well, I mean, this was like the hangover, and he almost went through with the hangover that was going to clean him. And then instead of just taking that opportunity, in my mind, and just basically killing the peso, and the way to kill it would have been very simple. Look, we have X dollars in our reserves, and we have this many pesos outside. Divide the pesos that are circulating by the dollars, and then obviously the exchange rate is going to go down drastically, 95% or something like that. And now you can get your peso exchanged for a dollar. And that's it. And game over. And then no more banks, no more central bank, no more peso. And then people are free to set up their own banks. Foreign banks can come and set up banks in Argentina. And then you no longer have an inflation problem, and you no longer have a government financing problem. Well, I mean, you still have the problem of financing the government, but it's solved by the fact that you can't finance the government anymore. And so now everybody who works for the government needs to go get a real job. So this would have been the way to fix it, I think. Instead, what he's doing is basically he's trying to keep the peso alive by borrowing some more and taking a loan from the IMF and then paying off that loan, and all of that in order to pay off the current bondholders. It's not just the destruction of the peso, but also the bonds. So he wants to pay off the current bondholders who lent money to the Argentine government, and in order to pay them off, he doesn't have the dollars to do it, so he's going to borrow from the IMF. And when he's trying to do his reforms domestically, he's going to be influenced by what the IMF says. And if the IMF could fix this, they would have fixed it with many of the other previous presidents. So if things continue the way that they are, I expect that maybe there will be some reduction in spending, there will be some reforms. But ultimately, if you still have an IMF loan to pay, how are you going to pay it? You're going to have to raise taxes, and you're going to have to get the government to get into people's lives and to take more and more money and to keep the Ponzi scheme going, where the government taxes people, it pays the parasite class to continue to not produce, and it essentially milks the society to the benefit of the issuers of the dollar and the international banks and all of these criminal cartels. And if you don't break that, I don't see how you can fix things. And of course, I don't see how you can fix that without Bitcoin. And this gets us to the main problem again, why Bitcoin really is the answer to everything, is that if he tried to do it and he just said, okay, we are defaulting on all of our bonds and our peso is now redeemable for the few dollars that we have, and that's it. Well, then what is the government going to do for its own spending? It's still going to have a government. What are they going to hold in their reserves? Dollars, you're getting devalued every year by around 7-8%. Bonds, you're getting devalued even worse, even with the yields that they give. You're witnessing the value of the bonds constantly getting destroyed. So what's going to happen if you try to do this and then went back to dollars and tried to keep using dollars? It's not going to work. And so the answer is Bitcoin. But he does not seem to care about Bitcoin. He seems to, he's been promoting a couple of shitcoins as well. There's, there have been videos of him talking about some silly shitcoin and talking about how it's going to fix things. So yeah, plenty of reason to be worried, unfortunately. But we'll see. Hopefully I'll be wrong. I did manage to get him a copy of my book in Spanish, so maybe he'll read it.
So you want to keep this just in case, you can switch to the handle. Beautiful color shirt.
Yes.
Ciao. Sì.
Yeah.
So thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
I have many questions, but the main one I have for you is you personally, as a person with a limited time span in your life, how do you see the future? Do you see hyper-Bitcoinization happening in your life, or in your kid's life, or in your grandkid's life? Do you see, because now in this cycle, I mean, the narrative, you also say that now, is not a payment technology issue, right? I mean, the narrative is more like the digital gold. If you go back 2017 and when everyone was trying to buy coffee with Bitcoin, the narrative was different. But now it's clear that this is a saving technology, right, for future. So in your personal opinion, for you, your life, your family, yourself, how do you see this future? I mean, selling your Bitcoin for some CBDC and buying stuff, or everyone accepting, I don't know, e-cash or something based on Bitcoin, or some kind of dollar backed on Bitcoin, or that's...
Just 1 second. And this last question is related, so you can probably answer both together.
He wrote. So going back to the assumption that many Bitcoiners talk about adoption as the ability to purchase via Bitcoin the stuff and goods around their life, and linking this question to the guy's question, I will say that as metric, we can take a better way to see adoption will be to talk about industries that can serve the Bitcoin industries, and I will see the adoption of Bitcoin like that. The war industries can serve the Bitcoin industry, and later the industry that serve Bitcoin accept Bitcoin. So there is this flow that begin in the Bitcoin industries, like mining or like services for Bitcoiners, and then who serve the Bitcoiners can be orange-pilled and so on. And at the end, there will be the retails with the bakery behind my house or the pizzeria. So do you think, and for the future, what will be the orange pilling or the switching between a fiat society to a Bitcoin society? Via retails, so bottom up, like I can go to a pizzeria and make him accept Bitcoin, or making to the question, that first question, via a industrialization that can serve Bitcoin.
Okay. I think, that you're right, they're related questions. I think if you ask me about when hyper-Bitcoinization on an individual level, it's already happened for me in 2019. When I was in Lebanon, there was hyperinflation, and I had my Bitcoins, and I didn't care about what happened with the bank. That's it. This is game over. Like, I've already finished the game. I've already, rescued the princess. My family, we can eat because our money was not lost because of hyperinflation. So it's already over for me. The fiat has already died. I've already been through that process, and it's just about the rest of the planet figuring this out and catching on. So, and that's really one of the most amazing things about Bitcoin, which is that you don't need the entire world to adopt it in order for you to adopt it. You just get some Bitcoin, get your private keys, and that's it. Whereas, with things like gold, and I used to be very passionate about needing to move to gold, you couldn't just use gold. You needed the government to have its currency in a central bank, and the banking system and everything needed to be run centrally. And so that's why, gold people want to advocate for politicians, and they want to vote, and they want the politicians to pass laws that get them. And for Bitcoiners, it's not like that. It doesn't matter. The Bitcoin economy can function without government sanction. We don't need government-sanctioned central banks in order for Bitcoin to work. Bitcoin can work because people use it individually. So I guess the answer to both questions is that it's up to you individually, and the only thing that you can control is your own adoption, and that's what matters. Now, if I were to guess, I'd probably say, I think something like 15 years from now, probably, and that's just a guess, but it's just the way that things are going, the way that growth happens. 15 years from now, Bitcoin will be 30 years old, and the vast majority of people alive are going to have had Bitcoin present in all of their adult life. So anybody who's going to be under, say, 48, which is the majority of the planet, will have seen Bitcoin all of their life. They've been hearing about Bitcoin all of their life. And I think at that point, if Bitcoin continues to operate, then I would imagine it's going to have gotten really big to the point where it's going to eat all the other monies. Now, in terms of what's going to drive the adoption, the way that I see it is that, again, it's not about how you're buying your coffee and how many people are buying coffee. I think if I were to parody this approach to Bitcoin adoption, it's as if in people's minds, it's as if there's going to be a survey at the end of the year where we're going to ask everybody in the world, how many coffees did you buy and which currency did you buy them? And then the currency that gets the most coffees gets a trophy, and it's just chosen as the global reserve currency, and now everybody has to use it. That's not how it works. Ultimately, what matters and what determines this is cash balances. What are people holding their cash balances in? This is the battle. This is really the battlefield is the world's cash balances. And the world's cash balances currently are around, I mean, it depends on what you calculate as cash balances. For me, I would say physical money, bank accounts, and government bonds. These are the things that people hold as cash in their portfolios, from individuals in their pockets to massive institutional investors with billions of dollars of allocation. These are the things that people are holding as cash, and these are the things that are obsoleted by Bitcoin. So currently, this is probably around the 150 trillion dollar market. Bitcoin is currently around 1.5 trillion. So Bitcoin needs around 100x in real terms increase in order to become the dominant cash balance in the world. So currently it needs to go up by 100%, and then it becomes the same size as all the rest of the world's currencies and cash balances and bonds together. So there's still a lot of room to go. But for me, it's ultimately about the cash balances, because it doesn't really matter what the currency of the transaction is, because you can always swap in and out of a currency before you carry out the transaction. In other words, I can come here, I don't hold any euros, but I come here, I exchange dollars for euros, and I get euros, and then I can buy the coffee with euros. It's not a massive win for adoption of euro. It's not going to mean that the euro is going to defeat the dollar. The euro could defeat the dollar if all the world's cash balances that are currently being held in dollars are transferred to euros, and then people in America and all over the world will prefer to get paid in the thing that they hold cash balances in. So for me, this is really what matters, cash balances. And the way that Bitcoin wins is that people stack harder, and the price of Bitcoin goes up. And as the price of Bitcoin goes up and the size of cash balances increases, people become more and more likely to trade with one another based on Bitcoin. So for instance, my website, I run a website where I teach economics, and most of my customers, I would say, are Bitcoiners. So because my primary cash balance is in Bitcoin, and most of my customers' primary cash balance is in Bitcoin, I think something like 1/3 of my sales are in Bitcoin. Because it's not because, it's, in my mind, it's not because Bitcoin, and those people want to support Bitcoin sales and they want to just experience the magic of using Bitcoin for payments. It's because the buyer and the seller have cash balances in Bitcoin. And as more and more people develop cash balances in Bitcoin, then you're going to see more and more of this. And I think we've seen a lot over the years, Bitcoiners go to a restaurant and they try and convince the restaurant, start accepting Bitcoin, and then they have an elaborate system where the restaurant accepts the Bitcoin, but then they just send the Bitcoins immediately to an exchange and they get cash, they get fiat instead of it. But if the restaurant and the restaurant owner are holding their cash balances in dollars or euros or fiat in general, then you're just really engaging in expensive rituals to do that. It's not going to help. In fact, it's probably hurting, because the customer who has Bitcoin is now losing money in order to convert. If the customer doesn't have a cash balance in Bitcoin, then I'm selling my euros in order to buy Bitcoin so that I give them to the restaurant, so that the restaurant sells the Bitcoins in order to buy euros. We're just paying 2 transaction fees, and that means we're going to end up with fewer Satoshis. So we're better off both stacking until we have enough of a cash balance where we can transact directly, where you have a cash balance in Bitcoin and I have a cash balance in Bitcoin. Yeah, so eventually this is how I see it.
Speaking of cash balance, sorry guys, the time for question is already over, but if you have a cash balance in fiat, come down here and you can get rid of it with the promise that Saifedean will use the money to stack sets. So you're helping hyper-Bitcoinization. So and if you have a stack balance in sets, we are going to keep and to stack. So we are not selling. So you go on the on my right here to buy and get books signed with Saif. Some guys of the organization maybe can help him with money. And you go left, or after you finish here, to sign up for the seminar in the afternoon or the full course. And please, a big round of applause for Saifedean Ammous.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.